Okay. Don Quixote Cervantes, Part 2, Chapter 23, about the amazing things that the magnificent Don Quixote said he'd seen in the deep cave of Montesinos, the magnitude and the impossibility of which caused this adventure to be considered apocryphal. It would have been about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when the sun veiled in cloud, and giving out an attenuated light, and the rays of pleasant warmth, provided Don Quixote with the opportunity to relate to the illustrious listeners, free of heat and discomfort, what he'd seen in the cave of Montesinos. And he began as follows. About 25 or 30 yards from the bottom of this dungeon, on the right-hand side, there is a concave space with room for a large cot and its muse. A dim light finds its way into it through some cracks or holes that extend right up to the distant surface of the earth. I spotted this concavity when I was feeling weary and frustrated from dangling the end of the rope as I was let down into that region of darkness, not knowing where I am going. And so I decided to enter and rest a little. I shouted to you not to let out any more rope until I told you to, but you cannot have heard me. I gathered in the rope you were sending down, coiled it into a pile, and sat down on top of it, deep in thought, as I wondered what I was going to do to reach the bottom without anybody to hold the rope. And as I sat there, pensive and confused, I was suddenly, and without any intention on my part, overcome by a deep sleep. And then, when I least expected it, with no idea how it had happened, I awoke and found myself in the middle of the most beautiful, pleasant, delightful meadow that nature could create or the liveliest human mind imagine. I opened my eyes wide, rubbed them, and realized that I was not asleep, but wide awake. I nonetheless felt my head and my chest to discover whether it was I myself sitting there, or some force, spurious apparition, but the touch, feeling, and the coherent reasoning in which I engaged all showed me that I was the same man then and there that I am now and here. What next came before my eyes was a sumptuous royal palace or castle, the walls of which seemed to be made of clearest crystal. 2 great doors opened wide, and I saw that out of them came walking toward me a venerable old man wearing a cloak of purple flannel that trailed over the ground. Draped over his his shoulders, and his chest. He had a collegiate tippet of green satin. On his head he wore a round black Milan cap, and his grey beard reached below his waist. He was not bearing any arms, but he was carrying a rosary with beads larger than the average walnut, and every tenth one about the size of the average Austriac. And his bearing, his gait, his gravity, and his powerful presence, each separately and all of them in combination, astonished and bewildered me. He came up to me, and his first action was to give me a warm embrace, and then he said, "It has been a long time, valiant knight Don Quixote de la Mancha, that we who live enchanted in these lonely places have been awaiting your visit, so that you can inform the world about what is hidden and buried in the deep cave into which you have entered, known as the Cave of Montesinos, an exploit reserved only to be attempted by your invincible heart and admirable spirit. Come with me, illustrious sir, and I shall show you the marvels concealed in this transparent castle, of which I am the warden and perpetual head guard. For I am none other than Montesinos, from whom the cave takes its name." As soon as he told me that he was Montesinos, I asked him whether there is any truth in what people in this world up here say, that he had taken a small dagger and cut his great friend Durandarte's heart out of his breast and carried it to the Lady Belerma, as Durandarte himself had ordered when he lay dying. Montesinos told me that everything he said is true, except as regards the dagger itself, because it had not been a dagger at all, not even a small one, but a keen poniard sharper than an oar. That their poniard Sancho butted in must have been made by Ramon de Hoches of Sevilla. "I know nothing about that," Don Quixote continued, "but it cannot have been made by that particular poniard manufacturer, because Ramon de Hoches was making them until very recently, and the Battle of Lonquesvalles, where the calamity occurred, was fought many years ago, and anyway the inquiry is irrelevant, for it does not affect the truth or the development of the history." "Quite right," said the cousin. "Do continue, Don Quixote, sir. I'm listening to your account with all the pleasure in the world. With no less pleasure do I tell it. Don Quixote replied, where the venerable Montesinos took me into the Crystal Palace, where in a room on the ground floor, wonderfully cool and made of alabaster, there was a marble tomb constructed with consummate skill, upon which I saw that a knight was lying, not one of bronze, marble, and jasper, as there often are on other tombs, but of real flesh and real blood. His right hand, which seemed somewhat hairy and sinewy, a sign of great strength, was held over his heart, and before I could ask Montesinos any questions, he saw me looking in amazement at the knight on the tomb, and said, "This is my friend Durandarte, the flower and the mirror of the brave and enamored knights of his time. He is kept here, enchanted, as I and many other men and women are also kept here by Merlin, that French sorcerer, who is said to have been the devil's son. And it is my belief that he was not the devil's son, but rather that he knew one trick more than the devil, as the saying goes. How and why he enchanted us, nobody can tell, but we shall find out in due course, and indeed before very long, in my belief. What astonishes me is that I know with as much certainty as I know that it is now daytime, that Durandarte breathed his last in my arms, and that after he died I cut out his heart with my own hand, and it must have weighed a good 2 pounds, because according to doctors, a man with a larger heart is endowed with more courage than a man with a small one. And if all this is so, and this knight really did die, how can he mourn and sigh every so often as if he were alive? Once Montesinos had finished speaking, the wretched Durandarte cried out and said, "Oh, my cousin Montesinos, listen to my last quest. When I am lying dead before you, and my soul's flown from my breast, take a poniard or a dagger, cut my heart from out of me, carry it to fair Belerma, to wherever she may be." When the venerable Montesinos heard this, he knelt before the afflicted knight and said with tears in his eyes, "But, Sir Durandarte, my dear cousin, I did indeed carry out your request on the fateful day of our defeat. I did cut out your heart as best I could, leaving not the tiniest scrap behind in your breast. I wiped it clean with a lace handkerchief. I left with it at top speed for France, as soon as I had laid you in the bosom of the earth, weeping such abundant tears that there were enough of them to wash my hands clean of all the blood I had on them from rummaging around inside you, and what is more, my dear cousin, in the first village I came to after leaving Loncesvalles, I sprinkled a little salt on my heart to stop it from smelling and bring it, if not fresh, then at least pickled, into the presence of the lady Belerma, who, together with you, me, your squire Guardiana, the duenna Luidera, and her 7 daughters and 2 nieces, and many others of your friends and acquaintances, has been kept here in enchantment by the sage Merlin for a very long time. And although more than 500 years have now passed by, none of us has died. The only ones who are no longer with us are Luidera and her daughters and nieces, because Merlin must have felt sorry for them when he saw them crying and turned them into lakes, which are now in the world of the living and in the province of La Mancha, known as the Lakes of Luidera. The 7 daughters' lakes belong to the kings of Spain, and the 2 nieces' lakes to the knights of most holy order, known as the Order of Saint John. Your squire Guardiana, also lamenting your misfortune, was changed into a river named after him, which, when it reached the surface and saw the sun in another heaven, felt such deep sorrow at the thought of leaving you that it plunged back into the depths of the earth. But since it cannot avoid following its natural course, from time to time it emerges and shows itself where the sun and the people can see it. The lakes I have spoken of supply it with their water, and thanks to this and other help it enters Portugal swollen and pompous. But for all that, whenever it goes, it reveals. Wherever it goes, it reveals its sadness and melancholy, and it does not bother to breed the delicate and highly prized fish in its waters, but also coarse and insipid ones, quite unlike those in the golden Tagus. And what I am telling you now, cousin, I have told you 1,000 times, and since you do not reply, I have to assume you do not believe me, or you cannot hear me, and only God knows how sad that makes me feel. And now I am going to give you some news that will maybe not ease your pain, but will at the least not add to it in any way. I can reveal to you that here in your presence, and if you will just open your eyes, you will be able to see him for yourself, stands the great knight about whom Merlin has made so many prophecies. I refer to Don Quixote de la Mancha, who has newly revived in the present age, and with great improvement over ages past, the forgotten order of knight-errantry, with the assistance of which it could happen that we might be disenchanted, because great exploits are reserved for great men. And if not, replied the afflicted Durandarte in a faint and feeble voice, if not, cousin, shuffle the pack and deal again. You never know your luck. And turning on his side, he sank back into silence without uttering another word. And now there was a great weeping and wailing, with deep groans and anguished sobs. I turned my head, and through the crystal walls I saw in another room a procession of 2 files of lovely damsels, all in mourning, wearing white turbans in the Turkish style. At the rear of the files came a lady, or at least that was what in her gravity she seems to be, also wearing black with white weeds so full and long that they brushed the floor. Her turban was twice as large as that of any of the damsels. Her eyebrows met, and she was somewhat pug-nosed. Her mouth was big, but her lips were bright red. Her teeth, which she occasionally revealed, were far apart and ill-set, although they were as white as hulled almond. In her hands she carried a piece of fine cambric, and inside it, as far as I could make out, a heart that must have been munified, to judge from its dry and shriveled aspect. Monsignors told me that all the people in the procession were the servants of Durandarte and Bellerma, enchanted together with their master and mistress, and that the lady at the end, carrying the heart wrapped in cambric, was the Lady Bellerma, who formed that procession 4 times a week with her damsels to sing, or rather wail, dirges over her cousin's body and afflicted heart, and that if she had seemed somewhat ugly, or not as beautiful as she was reputed to be, that was because of the terrible nights and even worse days she suffered in her enchantment, as I could observe in the great rings under her eyes and her sickly complexion, and her pallor, and the rings under her eyes are not